August 16, 1945. 07:15 hours. Naval Hospital, Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes stood in the morgue identification room, fluorescent lights humming overhead, holding a dog tag that should not exist. The metal was corroded by salt water, warped by explosion, stained dark with what laboratory analysis would later confirm as blood from 3 different time periods. The name stamped into the steel read, Wheeler, Thomas J. Service Number 370-09841. The same number that appeared on 2 separate casualty reports filed 18 months apart. The same man officially declared killed in action twice. And yet 3 floors above, in a recovery ward filled with the smell of antiseptic and the low moans of wounded men, Thomas Wheeler was breathing. His heart was beating. His eyes were open. What Lieutenant Commander Hayes did not know, as he turned the impossible dog tag over in his trembling fingers, was that he was holding physical evidence of the moment when probability itself had broken down. The moment when the war tried 3 times to kill the same man and 3 times failed. Prolonged immersion in salt water, not once, twice. The deformation suggested proximity to high explosive detonation. The blood evidence indicated severe trauma, each marker of death preserved in steel. And yet, the man lived. 1 man whose dog tags would be shipped home in small boxes, accompanied by telegrams of deepest regret, and 1 man who walked out of the crater, covered in blood that was not his own, clutching a rifle with a barrel bent at a 15-degree angle. When medics tried to take the weapon, Wheeler had looked at them with eyes that seemed to focus on something beyond the visible world and whispered, "It keeps happening. Why does it keep happening?" He stares to the recovery ward. Hospital orderlies moved between beds, changing dressings, distributing medications, recording vital signs with the mechanical efficiency of men who had seen too much suffering to process each individual case emotionally. But even they gave Wheeler's bed a wide berth. Even they sensed something fundamentally wrong about the young man who should have been dead 3 times over. Plickett contradictions told 3 different stories. March 19, 43. Merchant Marine seaman aboard SS Arcturus, torpedoed in North Atlantic. 217 souls aboard, 19 survivors. Wheeler listed among the 198 dead, body not recovered. September 7, 44. Navy radio man aboard destroyer USS Morrison, sunk by kamikaze attack off Leyte Gulf. Complement of 346, 43 survivors. Wheeler listed among the 303 dead, body not recovered. August 14, 45. Marine Corps corporal attached to 6th Division Headquarters, Okinawa. Direct hit by Type 92 Battalion Artillery. 42 personnel present. 1 survivor. Wheeler, Thomas J., critical condition, evacuated to Pearl Harbor. Industrial efficiency and mathematical certainty, Thomas Wheeler represented an impossible anomaly, a statistical ghost, a man who had fallen through every actuarial net designed to predict and quantify death. Drowning, hypothermia, blast trauma, shrapnel wounds, and severe psychological shock. Separately, each condition was survivable. Together, they represented an accumulated burden of trauma that should have resulted in systemic failure. Should have, but had not. Like someone trying to make themselves as small and unnoticeable as possible. Hayes had seen this before, in men who had survived impossible circumstances through some combination of luck, skill, and biological resilience that defied explanation. But he had never seen it 3 times in the same man. Dead. I was lucky. Miles from its supply base, and 217 men whose job was to cross an ocean that had become a killing field. Was important work. Without the engine, the ship was dead in the water. And in the North Atlantic in 1943, being dead in the water meant being dead. CT submarines before they attacked. Theory assumed that sonar and radar could penetrate the darkness and reveal the enemy. Theory did not account for German U-boats operating in wolf packs, coordinating their attacks with a precision that turned protective formations into target-rich environments. A sinking coffin. The impact point was amidships, starboard side, exactly where the engine room met the cargo holds. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Hull plates designed to withstand storm waves buckled inward like aluminum foil. Water at near-freezing temperature poured through the rupture with the force of a burst dam. The ship's internal structure, compromised by the blast, began to fail in a cascading sequence of mechanical collapse. The sound of metal tearing. The emergency lighting system, dependent on electrical power from the engine room, had failed immediately. His compartment, which had contained 12 sleeping men seconds before, was now a black void filling rapidly with Atlantic seawater. He could hear screaming. He could hear prayers. He could hear the groaning of steel under impossible stress. He could not see anything. Was closest to the compartment hatch. This accident of bunk assignment provided a 7-second advantage over his compartment mates. 7 seconds during which he thrashed through waist-deep water, found the hatch by touch, and pulled himself through into a passageway that was rapidly becoming a vertical shaft. Behind him, the compartment hatch swung shut, pushed by water pressure. The mechanical latch engaged. 11 men trapped in darkness as water rose from ankle-deep to neck-deep to ceiling. Deep. 11 men who had 7 fewer seconds than Wheeler. 11 men whose dog tags would be sent home to 11 families who would receive telegrams explaining that their sons had died serving their country in the North Atlantic. The passageway from ruptured pipes. The ladder rungs were slick with oil and seawater, and Wheeler was climbing in complete darkness, using only his hands to find each successive rung, while below him the ocean swallowed the ship section by section. Tipple directions, some toward lifeboats, some toward fire stations, some simply running because running was the only response their panicked minds could generate. Officers shouted orders that could not be heard over the roar of fire and the screaming of steam venting from ruptured boilers, and beneath it all, the low grinding sound of a ship dying. Rue of 217. But the mathematics of lifeboat capacity assumed calm seas, functioning davits, and time to conduct an orderly evacuation. The North Atlantic in March provided none of these conditions. Them required cutting the davit lines and hoping the boats would swing down rather than smash against the hull. 2 boats were launched successfully. One capsized immediately when it hit the water, spilling 37 men into an ocean cold enough to kill in 15 minutes. The other drifted away into darkness, carrying 41 survivors who would be rescued 18 hours later by a British corvette. Arcturus made its final decision. The torpedo damage, the water weight in the flooded compartments, and the structural failure of the keel combined to exceed the ship's stability threshold. The list increased from 23 degrees to 45 degrees in under 8 seconds. Men lost their footing and slid across the tilted deck toward the burning cargo hold. Equipment broke loose and tumbled. The main mast, no longer vertical, swayed and then toppled, crushing everything beneath it. I grabbed a railing and held on. He could feel the ship accelerating its descent, could feel the suction as the ocean claimed its prize, and then he jumped, not toward a lifeboat, not toward a life raft, but away from the ship as far as his legs could propel him, out into the darkness where at least the sinking vessel would not drag him down with it. Human, 10 to 15 minutes before loss of consciousness, 30 to 45 minutes before death from hypothermia. Wheeler hit the water and felt his body's immediate response. Gasping inhalation, racing heartbeat, blood vessels constricting to preserve core temperature. He was wearing work clothes and boots, no life jacket, no flotation device, no thermal protection. 3 minutes, loss of manual dexterity, inability to perform complex tasks. After 5 to 10 minutes, loss of effective swimming ability, arms and legs no longer responding to conscious control. After 10 to 15 minutes, unconsciousness. After 30 to 45 minutes, cardiac arrest. Archlight swept across floating debris. An able seaman named Christopher Bennett, scanning the water for survivors, saw an arm raised in what could have been a wave, or could have been the random motion of a corpse. Bennett convinced the officer of the watch to heave to long enough to deploy a boat. They pulled Wheeler from the water 51 minutes after the SS Arcturus disappeared beneath the waves. Al. 3 degrees past the threshold where most humans lose consciousness. 1 degree past the point where cardiac arrhythmia typically becomes fatal. But Wheeler's heart was still beating. His lungs were still processing oxygen. His brain was still generating electrical activity that indicated consciousness, however minimal. A combination of clinical precision and personal disbelief. Patient presents with severe hypothermia, near drowning, and exposure. Core temperature 89.3 degrees. Heart rate 48 beats per minute, irregular. Respiratory rate 6 breaths per minute, shallow. Patient semi-conscious, responding to painful stimuli only. Prognosis, grave. Treatment, warming protocols initiated immediately. Warm liquids, monitored constantly for the cardiac events that typically follow severe hypothermia. His temperature climbed slowly, 92 degrees by hour 6, 95 degrees by hour 18, 97 degrees by hour 48. On the third day, he was awake and lucid enough to provide his name, rank, and service number. On the fourth day, he was asking about his ship. 17. Wheeler among them only because of what Morrison termed remarkable physiological resilience and, quite frankly, miraculous timing. The official report, filed with Naval Headquarters, concluded, Seaman Wheeler's survival represents the extreme positive end of the statistical distribution for cold water immersion. While unusual, it is not unprecedented. No further investigation warranted. Discovered until decades later when archives were digitized and cross-referenced. I have treated 11 cases of severe hypothermia in 3 months at sea. 10 died. The one who lived was in the water half as long as Wheeler, with twice the body mass and full flotation gear. I do not understand how this man survived. I am marking him fit for duty because the paperwork requires it. But something about this case troubles me deeply. Pneumonia and frostbite, and released to limited duty 6 weeks later. His service record noted the incident in bureaucratic language. Survived sinking of SS Arcturus, March 19, 43. Commended for resilience under extreme duress. He was reassigned to shore duty, classified as temporarily unfit for sea operations, and spent 4 months working in a supply depot in Boston, while his lungs healed and his body recovered from trauma that should have killed him. In 43, the military's need for experienced personnel outweighed its concern for his medical history. Wheeler was reclassified as fit for full duty and given a choice: remain in the Merchant Marine or transfer to the Navy. He chose Navy. He wanted, he told the recruiting officer, to serve on something with guns, something that could fight back. Offend larger vessels from air attack. Complement of 346 officers and enlisted men, armament sufficient to engage surface vessels, submarines, and aircraft with equal effectiveness. Wheeler trained as a radio man, learning Morse code and radio procedures, becoming part of the communications network that coordinated fleet operations across thousands of miles of ocean. Contains multiple commendations. But it also contains notes from the ship's medical officer documenting recurring nightmares, occasional panic attacks triggered by the sound of water, and a general hypervigilance that suggested unresolved trauma. The medical officer recommended psychiatric evaluation. The recommendation was noted and ignored. In 1944, with the war in the Pacific intensifying and casualties mounting, the Navy did not have the luxury of removing capable personnel for psychological concerns. To a new weapon, the kamikaze. That the war had moved beyond conventional morality into a realm where suicide became an acceptable military tactic. Lead at wave-top level, invisible to radar until too close to intercept effectively. As deep in the ship's interior, below the waterline, surrounded by steel and electronics. Wheeler's battle station. His job during air attacks was to maintain communication with the fleet, transmit damage reports, call for assistance if needed. He sat at his console, headphones on, hand on the Morse key, listening to the controlled chaos of naval combat. Shredded the aircraft 500 yards out. It tumbled into the ocean, trailing smoke. The second kamikaze was hit but maintained enough control to crash into the forward deck, penetrating into a berthing compartment before its bomb detonated. 19 men killed instantly, fire spreading through the forward section. Absorbed hits that would have disabled a normal aircraft and struck the USS Morrison on the port side directly above the engine room. The aircraft's bomb, along with the remaining aviation fuel, detonated inside the ship. A leak, but from the ship's internal fire suppression system activating in response to the fires spreading through the hull. Before, he knew how quickly remain at your station became drown at your station. Was listing 15 degrees to port and sinking visibly, the bow already low in the water. Rear structure, its bomb detonating in or near the aft magazine. Section remained afloat for another 4 minutes before following. Ohmic reflex hooked over the debris and held on. To the Morrison's final distress transmission arrived to find 43 men floating in the water. 43 survivors from a crew of 346. Wheeler was pulled aboard, treated for blast injuries and immersion, and evacuated to a hospital ship. His medical report documented compound fracture of left radius and ulna, concussion with loss of consciousness, ruptured left tympanic membrane, multiple contusions and lacerations, mild hypothermia, severe shock. Ting officer who interviewed Wheeler 2 weeks later noted, "Radio man Second Class Wheeler was at his battle station when the ship was struck. He evacuated per standard protocols and was on deck when the final explosion occurred. His survival appears attributable to his position on the ship at the time of the explosion and his proximity to flotation debris. No disciplinary action warranted. Commendation for remaining at post until evacuation became necessary." Later in different handwriting, "Subject is sole survivor from radio room. 5 other radio men on duty remained at their stations and were killed when the compartment flooded. Subject's decision to evacuate, while technically correct, warrants consideration regarding psychological state and suitability for continued service. As updated. 2 sinkings, 2 survivals. Subject demonstrates exceptional resilience and adaptability. Recommend assignment to ground forces to avoid psychological complications associated with further naval service. In division as a replacement. His job, radio operator for division headquarters. His location, Okinawa. His fate, to discover that the war had not forgotten him. Orders, located in a fortified position 3 miles behind the theoretical front lines. The war was a matter of processing paperwork, coordinating logistics, and occasionally dying when random artillery rounds found their target. Inside, officers planning operations, clerks typing reports, radio men coordinating with subordinate units. Wheeler was at his station, transmitting supply requests, when the first round landed 60 yards away. The second landed 30 yards out. The third landed directly on the headquarters bunker. Exposed to blast overpressure, fragmentation, and structural collapse. Artment absorbed the blast from one direction, while the main bunker's wall absorbed it from another. The effect was to create a small pocket of reduced overpressure. Reduced, but not eliminated. But he remained conscious, and he remained alive. His back and legs. He could breathe, but each breath sent pain through his chest. He could think, but his thoughts were fragmented, disjointed, cycling between immediate physical sensation and the larger impossibility of being alive again when everyone around him had died again. After minutes or hours, he had no way to measure time. He began to dig. By hand, removing debris piece by piece until they uncovered the latrine compartment and found Wheeler alive inside. The rescuers' report documented their reaction. Upon discovering survivor, all personnel initially believed subject was enemy combatant, as survival of friendly personnel was considered impossible. Subject identified himself via dog tag. Evacuation proceeded immediately. Tonation, ruptured eardrums, rib fractures, penetrating shrapnel wounds, severe contusion, and profound psychological shock. But they also documented something else. Something that troubled them enough to include in their report. Subject's survival represents statistical impossibility. 41 personnel in same structure killed instantly or within minutes of blast. Subject's position in latrine compartment provided marginal protection, but insufficient to explain survival. No medical explanation. Unavailable. Recommend psychiatric evaluation and observation. Testimonies. He interviewed doctors who had treated Wheeler after each incident. He consulted with psychiatrists, statisticians, and chaplains, and he reached a conclusion that he documented in his final report. Corporal Thomas Wheeler has survived 3 separate incidents, each with mortality rates exceeding 87%. Cumulative probability of this outcome is approximately 0.00027%, or 1 in 370,000. This represents the most extreme case of statistical outlier behavior in modern military history, or evidence of factors not yet understood by medical science. Facility in California. The diagnosis was combat fatigue, a catch-all term for psychological trauma that the military was only beginning to understand. Wheeler spent 6 months in treatment, 6 months during which he barely spoke, barely ate, barely engaged with the world around him. The psychiatrists documented his condition. Subject presents with severe survivor guilt, depressive symptoms, and possible dissociative features. Subject repeatedly states that his survival is wrong, and that he should have died with his comrades. Prognosis uncertain. And treatment. Victory in Europe, followed by victory in Japan after atomic weapons demonstrated that industrial warfare had reached a new threshold of destructive capability. The world began the long process of rebuilding, of counting its dead, of trying to understand what had happened during 6 years of mechanized slaughter. Wheeler was discharged from the Marines in March of 1946, given a disability pension for his injuries, and sent home to a country that did not quite know what to do with the millions of men returning from combat. Encountered Wheeler's case in archived medical records. The historian, a professor at Yale, contacted Wheeler and requested an interview. Wheeler, now 70 years old, agreed. The interview lasted 6 hours and covered all 3 incidents in detail. The historian asked the question that everyone had asked: how did you survive? Lydian statistics. I've talked to doctors and psychiatrists and chaplains, and I don't have an answer. I survived because I made small decisions that happened to be right. I survived because I was in the right place or the wrong place, depending on how you look at it. I survived because my body kept working when it should have stopped. But mostly I survived because hundreds of other men died. That's what people don't understand. My survival wasn't separate from their deaths. It was built on their deaths. Every minute I lived was a minute they didn't. And that's something you carry forever. Saint odds. Wheeler was unique not because he survived impossible circumstances, but because he survived them 3 times. Because of position, because of 1,000 small factors that had nothing to do with who they were as human beings. And I lived for the same reason. There's no justice in that, no meaning, just chance. And the weight of knowing that chance favored you when it destroyed others. In New Orleans, where it remains on display. The museum label provides context: the 3 incidents, the casualty figures, the statistical improbability. But it concludes with a quote from Wheeler himself, from that long interview in 1985. This tag survived everything I survived. It's marked by salt water from 2 oceans, by explosion, by blood. People look at it and see a story of survival. I look at it and see evidence of how random death is in war, how arbitrary, how completely indifferent to human worth or human desire. I survived. I don't know why. And that not knowing, that's what I've carried every day for 40 years. 70,000 probability. They provide the medical answer: exceptional physiological resilience. They provide the tactical answer: fortunate positioning at critical moments. But what they cannot provide is the answer Wheeler himself never found. Why him? Why not the 11 men trapped in the berthing compartment when the SS Arcturus sank? Why not the 303 men who died when the USS Morrison broke in half? Why not the 41 men working in the headquarters bunker when the artillery round struck? Cures when death misses by inches or seconds or accidents of geometry. Have died in his bunk. The kamikaze could have struck 5 feet to the left or right, and Wheeler would have died on deck. The artillery round could have landed in the latrine compartment, and Wheeler would have died in the one place that actually saved him. Ended to allow one future to continue. 542 families receiving telegrams while one family received a living son. Ours, there is no answer. Only the fact of it. Only the weight of it. Only the steel that holds the evidence.